Hey guys, today we're going to be learning about JSON object deserialization. Now this methodology will also work for XML serialization, any kind of other object serialization or deserialization techniques. But for today we're going to focus on JSON and converting a JSON object into a C# data object through data model programming. So if we look at our JSON example here, we can see on our first set of black lines here, we have the JSON object container, which is also known as the root container. This will contain the entire JSON object and will be your root level C# object container. Inside of this container, we have an assortment of variables and 2 arrays or lists. We can use array or list in this situation. I'm going to use lists because I prefer to use lists rather than arrays. It makes it easier for enumeration. So let's take a look over here in Visual Studio and let's convert some of this into C# code. So as you can see here, we've created some code here on the right side which will represent our JSON data object in C#. And I have also written out explanations to the side of every single variable and stuff inside of the JSON object itself, so you can see how it converts in C#. So the very first open bracket that corresponds to the very last closed bracket will be our root object. I've called this public class JSON Deserializer, but JSON Deserializer is actually a typed class in System.Text.Json, so you want to call it something else. When we get to writing this actual code later, I'll call it person. So public class person and contain all of the variables that you can see on the left here: ID, index, GUID, is active, age, eye color, name, registration, date, latitude, longitude, tags, and friends. Now, ID to longitude are standard variables, strings, ints, and doubles, and booleans. But when we get down to tags, we can see some interesting stuff happening. We have a square bracket instead of a curly bracket. This indicates the use of an array or list type object in JSON. So in C#, we can use string array, or we can do list of string, or you could even do a dictionary or some other kind of collection if you'd want. I have written here an array, but later on in the code we'll write it as a list, just so you can see the difference. And then down below you can see something even more different, and that's a square bracket with curly brackets inside of it. Now this indicates that we have an array of objects. So just as the root JSON object contains all of the data in the main structure of the data, the object on the bottom contains its own type of variables, and we'll call that public class friend, and it only contains 2 variables, ID and name. Now let's go over to Visual Studio and actually write this up into a program. Then we can save some data to a file, and then we can read it back into the command prompt and access different properties of the data through object model programming. Alright, so now that we're over here in Visual Studio, you can see here that we have written up our JSON object into a code comment, just so I can reference it easier here when I'm writing out the classes. And we'll go ahead and start writing out these classes and get the object model ready for deserialization. So I'll see you back here in a second when that's done. Alright, now that that's done, let's go ahead and write our program logic so that we can read from the data file and then deserialize it and display some of that code into the terminal window. Now that we've completed our main code section here, we can go ahead and run some tests. So first we're going to print the deserialized data object to string and see what happens. Note how it only displays the object type and none of its data. That's because we're not working with typical types of data here. We're working with custom-built objects. So a more accurate test would be, let's try and see what happens if we access the GUID variable from the person object. Now that you understand how deserialization works, you can understand that serialization works in almost the exact same way. It will generate a JSON file from a person class. We don't have a setup to create new people or friends, so we'll just explain how it works. So you would create a new person and populate all of its data. Then you would pass that person object into the JSON serializer and it would save it to a JSON file. Alright, that'll do for now, guys. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. Thank you for watching and have a great day.